You're standing at the threshold now. You've given yourself permission to fail. You've built your vessel, your sense of agency, your understanding of sound principles, your capacity to recognize safe guidance from exploitation. You've received your compass, position, and balance. Those two simple filters that cut through all the complexity. And now you're asking, what do I do with all this? How do I actually train? What program should I follow? What's the right stance width? What's the perfect grip? Give me the answers. I understand that urgency. I do. But today, I want to ask you to pause, to breathe, to consider a different question entirely. What if the point isn't to find the answers? What if the point is to learn to live the questions? I'm Edward Allectan Jr., and this is Powerlifting Made Simple. Today, I'm speaking directly to you who are just beginning this journey, you who are standing at that threshold wondering if you're ready, if you know enough, if you'll ever figure this out. I want to tell you something that might seem counterintuitive, something that Austrian poet Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote in a letter to a young artist who was struggling with the same uncertainty you might be feeling now. He wrote, "Have patience with everything that is unresolved in your heart, and try to cherish the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms and like books written in a very strange tongue. Do not search now for the answers which cannot be given you because you could not live them. It is a matter of living everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, one distant day live right into the answer. This is your blessing as you cross the threshold into the unknown. Not a map with every turn marked out, not a guarantee that you'll never get lost, but an invitation to embrace the journey itself, the questions, the uncertainty, the gradual unfolding of understanding that can only come through lived experience. Let me show you what this means in practice. Let me show you how to train, not by demanding immediate answers, but by learning to ask better questions and trusting that the answers will emerge in their own time. First, let's be honest about what makes this hard. You want to know. You want certainty. You want someone to tell you this is the right way to squat. This is the right program. This is how you get strong. And I understand why. The world of powerlifting is full of confident voices telling you they have the answer. This coach swears by low bar squatting. That one says high bar is superior. This program promises you'll add 100 pounds to your squat in 12 weeks. That one says slow progress is the only sustainable progress. This influencer says you need to max out weekly. That one says testing your max is a waste of training time. The noise is overwhelming. And in the face of all that contradiction, all that certainty from every direction, your own uncertainty feels like weakness, like ignorance, like you're not ready to be here. But here's what I want you to understand. That uncertainty isn't a flaw. It's not something to overcome as quickly as possible. That uncertainty is actually the most honest response to the truth of what training is. Because here's the truth. There is no single right answer. There's no perfect program that works for everyone. There's no ideal stance width that's correct for all bodies. There's no training philosophy that captures the full complexity of how human beings adapt to stress, recover, grow stronger, and navigate not just the physical, but the psychological and emotional dimensions of pushing their limits. Anyone who tells you they have the answer is either lying to you or lying to themselves. But, and this is crucial, that doesn't mean all approaches are equally valid. It doesn't mean you can't discern better from worse. It means that the answers are contextual, individual, and emergent. They arise from the specific interaction between you, your body, your psychology, your life circumstances, and the training stimulus. The answers can't be given to you. They have to be lived into. And that living into, that gradual discovery through practice, requires that you stay with the questions, that you resist the temptation to grasp at premature certainty, that you develop what the Buddhists call beginner's mind and what Emerson called the independence of solitude, the capacity to trust your own unfolding understanding even when you don't yet know where it's leading. This is hard, especially in a culture that glorifies certainty and mocks doubt, especially when you're surrounded by people who seem to have it all figured out. The ancient Greeks had a word for this kind of false confidence: pseudo-andreia, false courage. It's the artificially inflated martial spirit that comes from a commander's speech before battle, the temporary surge of certainty that feels like strength, but vanishes the moment real difficulty arrives. In Gates of Fire, Stephen Pressfield writes about how the Spartans viewed this. In their minds, it is the mark of an ill-prepared and amateur army to rely in the moments before battle on what they call pseudo-andreia, false courage, meaning the artificially inflated martial frenzy produced by a general's 11th hour harangue or some peak of bronze-banging bravado built to by shouting, shield-pounding, and the like. It made no difference. None was a match for the warriors of Lacedaemon, and all knew it. The Spartans understood something crucial. Real strength doesn't come from pumping yourself up with false certainty. It doesn't come from convincing yourself you have all the answers. Real strength, true courage, comes from preparation, from discipline, from the quiet confidence that emerges through practice, even when you don't know everything. This is what I'm inviting you into, not the pseudo-andreia of, I've got it all figured out. Not the false courage of grasping at premature certainty because uncertainty feels too uncomfortable, but the deeper strength of being able to sit with not knowing without collapsing into anxiety or reaching for false answers. This is the mental game that separates lifters who burn out from lifters who build something sustainable. This is what allows you to keep training through plateaus, through confusion, through the inevitable moments when nothing seems to be working and you don't know why. Okay, so if we're not searching for definitive answers, what are we doing? How do we actually train? This is where the training hypothesis comes in. It's a way of holding your training practice lightly enough that you can learn from it, while still giving yourself enough structure to actually progress. Let me show you what I mean, starting with something specific, something you might be working on right now. Let's say you're trying to figure out your squat. You've been playing with position and balance like we talked about last week, and you've noticed something. When you let your knees track further forward, you feel more balanced. You feel like you can use your quads more. The squat feels more upright, more stable. So you form a simple hypothesis. Keeping my knees forward in my squat allows me to press more with my quads and stay balanced over midfoot. Notice what this is. It's not a declaration of universal truth. It's not, knees forward is the right way to squat. It's a tentative idea about what might work for your body in this moment. Now you test it. Not in one session, but over several sessions. You pay attention, using your filters of position and balance, to how it feels. Does keeping your knees forward actually help you stay balanced? Or do you notice that you're still shifting forward onto your toes? That's feedback. That's the question asking you to look deeper. Does it feel like you're using more quads? Or do you notice that your hips are still doing most of the work? That's information. That's the hypothesis beginning to refine itself. And here's where it gets interesting. Maybe after 2 weeks, you notice that, yes, keeping your knees forward does help with balance in the top half of the squat. But at the very bottom, you're still losing position. Your torso is folding over. So now the question evolves. It's not, is knees forward good or bad? It's, what else needs to adjust to support this knee position? Do I need to keep my knees forward longer, especially during the ascent? Do I need to widen my stance slightly? Do I need to work on my bracing so my torso stays more rigid? See how this works? You're not looking for the one right answer. You're asking a question, living with it, letting it teach you, and then asking a more refined question. This is iterative refinement, just like Houston teaches with drawing. Is it better or worse? What happens if I adjust this? How does that feel? Let me try again. But here's the crucial part, and this is where Rilke's wisdom comes in. You can't rush this process. You can't demand that the answer reveal itself in one training session. You have to be patient. You have to trust that if you keep asking honest questions and paying attention to the feedback, the understanding will emerge. Let me give you another example, more general this time. Maybe you're trying to figure out how much volume you need. You've heard that more volume equals more gains. You've also heard that too much volume leads to injury and burnout. So what's right for you? Form a hypothesis. I'm going to try 3 working sets per lift, 2 times per week, and see how I recover. Now live with that question for a training block, say 3 to 4 weeks. Pay attention. How's your recovery? How's your energy? Are you getting stronger? Are you getting more beat up? Maybe you notice that 3 sets feels good for squats and deadlifts, but your bench recovers faster. You could probably handle 4 or 5 sets there, or add an additional day. Okay, the question is refining itself. You're learning what your body needs. Or maybe you notice that 2 days a week for deadlifts is too much. You're always sore. Your technique is becoming less consistent. So you adjust. Maybe you try 1 heavy day and 1 light day. You're still living the question, but now you're asking a more specific and idiosyncratic version of it. This is not the same as program hopping. Program hopping is grasping at certainty. This didn't work after 2 weeks, so I'll try something completely different. That's pseudo-Andrea again, the false courage of premature certainty. Living the questions is staying with a hypothesis long enough to actually learn from it while remaining open to what it's teaching you. It's the deeper courage of patience and discipline. Now here's where it gets beautiful. As you live these questions, as you develop your capacity to form hypotheses and test them honestly, you start to see patterns. You start to understand not just what works, but why it works. And that understanding allows you to layer complexity gradually. This is how you evolve from beginner to intermediate to advanced without getting overwhelmed. Not by following increasingly complicated programs, but by developing increasingly sophisticated questions through which you get to live the answers. As a beginner, your question might be, what stance width lets me hit depth? That's perfect. That's exactly the right question for where you are. And you live it. You try different widths. You pay attention to position and balance. You find what works. Then, as you get more experience, the question evolves. What stance width lets me hit depth while maintaining balance over midfoot throughout the entire range of motion? Same question, but more refined, more nuanced. Now you're not just looking for depth. You're looking for depth with efficiency. And then later, what stance width and toe angle combination allows me to hit depth, maintain balance, and maximize force production through my strongest muscle groups? The question keeps deepening. But notice, you couldn't ask this third question when you were a beginner. You didn't have the experience yet. You didn't have the feel for what force production through muscle groups even means in your body. Rilke understood this. He told the young poet, "Do not search now for the answers which cannot be given you because you could not live them. You have to earn the right to ask more complex questions by living the simpler ones first. You have to build your capacity for nuanced understanding through patient practice with the fundamentals." This is the fractal nature of learning. Each question contains within it the seeds of the next question. Each answer you live your way into opens up new territory to explore. And here's what's remarkable. This process never ends. Even elite lifters are still asking questions. The questions just keep getting more refined, more specific, more attuned to the subtle variables that matter at that level. But they're still living the questions. They're still iterating. They're still curious about better or worse. So, how do you stay oriented in all this uncertainty? How do you avoid getting lost in endless questioning that goes nowhere? This is where your vessel comes back in. This is where position and balance become not just technical filters, but a way of staying grounded in the midst of not knowing. Remember, you have a compass. When you're uncertain about whether something is working, you can always return to these two questions. Where am I positioned? Where is my balance? These aren't just abstract philosophical questions. They're concrete, felt experiences that you can assess right now in this training session with this weight. When you form a training hypothesis, I'm going to try a wider stance. You're not lost in pure abstraction. You're testing something observable through position and measurable through balance. Does the wider stance allow me to maintain better position through the range of motion? Let me feel it. Let me watch the video. Let me pay attention. Does the wider stance improve my balance? Do I feel more stable? Do I stay over midfoot more consistently? Your filters give you a way to assess your hypotheses that isn't dependent on external validation. You're not waiting for a coach to tell you if it worked. You're not comparing yourself to someone on Instagram. You're paying attention to your own phenomenological experience, your felt sense of position and balance. This is the self-possession that Emerson wrote about. This is what it means to keep with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude, even in the midst of the crowded gym, even with all the contradictory advice swirling around you. You have your ground. You have your way of assessing. You have your compass. And because you have that, you can afford to be patient. You can afford to live the questions. You're not adrift in uncertainty. You're grounded in your own capacity to pay attention and iterate with curiosity. There's something Rilke wrote in another letter that I think captures the heart of what I'm trying to tell you. He wrote, "Perhaps you do carry within you the possibility of creating and forming as an especially blessed and pure way of living. Train yourself for that, but take whatever comes with great trust. Train yourself. Not train according to someone else's prescription. Train yourself. Develop your capacity to assess, to refine, to form your own hypotheses, and live them honestly. But take whatever comes with great trust." Rilke understood what this kind of training requires. He also wrote to the young poet, "Love your solitude, and bear the pain which it has caused you with fair-sounding lament. For those that are near you are far, you say, and this shows that distance begins to grow round you. And when your nearness is far, then your distance is already among the stars and very great. Be glad of your growing, into which you can take no one else with you, and be good to those that remain behind, and be self-possessed, and quiet with them, and do not torment them with your doubts, and do not frighten them with your confidence or joy, which they could not comprehend. Because as you grow in this practice, as you develop the capacity to live your questions honestly, some people won't understand. They'll wonder why you're not following the proven program, why you're iterating and experimenting instead of just doing what works for everyone else. But that distance, Rilke says, is your world expanding. You can rejoice in your growth, even though you can take none with you into it. And you can be kind to those who remain behind, secure and calm before them, not tormenting them with your doubts or frightening them with your confidence which they cannot understand. This is the paradox. Your solitude, your willingness to train yourself, to live your own questions. This is what eventually allows you to truly meet others, not as someone you need to validate you, not as someone whose path you must copy, but as a neighbor, a fellow human bearing the same weight of uncertainty and growth. And here's the other paradox of training with questions. You work hard, you pay attention, you iterate and refine, but you also trust that the process itself is teaching you things you couldn't have learned any other way. Sometimes what comes is a PR. Sometimes what comes is a plateau. Sometimes what comes is an injury that forces you to completely rethink your approach. Sometimes what comes is a breakthrough in understanding that changes everything. All of it is part of living the questions. All of it is teaching you something. Emerson understood this too. He wrote, "The world is nothing. The man is all. In yourself is the law of all nature. It is for you to know all. It is for you to dare all. It's for you to know, not for someone else to tell you. The knowledge emerges from your own honest engagement with the practice, but that knowing requires daring. It requires the courage to train without certainty, to form hypotheses that might be wrong, to iterate patiently even when progress feels slow, to trust your own judgment even when it contradicts what everyone else is doing. This is why we spent episode 2 building your vessel, your capacity for self-trust, your understanding of sound principles, your ability to recognize exploitation. Because without that foundation, this kind of training, this living of questions, would be too terrifying. But with that foundation, it becomes liberating. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to know the perfect program. You don't have to eliminate all uncertainty before you begin. You just have to be willing to ask honest questions, pay attention to the feedback, and trust that understanding will emerge through the living of it. So here's what I imagine for you, your first real training session after crossing this threshold. You walk into the gym. This is the environment where most of your trials and tribulations will unfold. This is where you'll test your hypotheses. This is where position and balance stop being abstract ideas and become felt reality under heavy weight. The competition platform? That's different. That's the abyss. That's where everything you've learned gets tested under the ultimate pressure. But we'll talk about that when you're ready. For now, we're talking about training, about the daily work, about the gradual accumulation of understanding that happens in the ordinary grind of showing up and doing the work. You step under the bar, and maybe you're uncertain. Maybe you're not sure if your stance is right, if your programming is optimal, if you're doing this correctly, but you have your questions. You have your hypothesis for today. I'm going to keep my knees forward and see how my balance feels. So you squat, and you pay attention. Position. Where are my knees? Balance. Where's my center of mass? Better or worse? Let me adjust. Let me try again. You're not trying to nail the perfect squat. You're not trying to prove anything. You're just living the question. You're iterating, you're refining, and at the end of the session, maybe you don't have a definitive answer. Maybe you just have a slightly more refined question. Okay, knees forward helps, but I need to keep cueing it on the way up to maintain balance in my torso position. Perfect. That's progress. That's living your way into understanding. Let me close with this, young powerlifter. You are standing at the threshold of something remarkable. Not just the journey to get stronger, though you will get stronger, but the journey of learning to trust yourself, of learning to pay attention, of learning to ask your questions and to live with them patiently until the answers emerge. This is what Campbell meant when he said the supernatural aid is a promise that the hero will not be left alone. You won't be alone because you have your vessel, you have your compass, you have your curiosity. But more than that, you won't be alone because you'll be with yourself, in the solitude that Emerson and Rilke both understood as the foundation of all real companionship, all real strength. Rilke wrote, "All companionship can consist only in the strengthening of two neighboring solitudes. As you train, as you live these questions, you're strengthening your own solitude, your own capacity to know yourself, to trust yourself, to be beside yourself through all the uncertainty and iteration that strength requires. And from that strength and solitude, you can receive coaching without losing yourself. You can train with others without comparing yourself. You can be part of a community without abandoning your own judgment. Next week, we'll talk about what happens in that first training session and beyond, the trials and tribulations that arise in the gym environment, the patterns you'll encounter, the ways you'll be tested. But I wanted to give you this blessing first, this invitation to embrace the questions rather than desperately seeking premature answers. So here's your assignment. Pick one question about your training, just one. Form a simple hypothesis and commit to living with it for your next couple of training sessions. Not trying to answer it in one session, not abandoning it if it doesn't immediately work, just living it, paying attention, using your filters of position and balance to assess what it's teaching you. Write the question down. Come back to it after each training session. Notice what you're learning. Notice how the question evolves. This is how you begin. This is how you cross the threshold with grace. Be patient. Be curious. Be willing to not know. Trust that the understanding is already unfolding, even if you can't see it yet. The barbell is waiting. The questions are waiting. And you, with your vessel, your compass, and your courage, you are ready. Go train. Go live the questions. Gradually, without even noticing it, one distant day you'll live and lift right into the answers. Thank you for receiving my letter. This is Powerlifting Made Simple. I'll see you in the gym next week.